You are now listening to Hinckley Community Radio, a non-profit podcast radio station.
On the 15th of December 1900, on the steamship Arctur, whilst on a passage from Philadelphia to Leith, the captain noted in his logbook that during the poor weather conditions the steamship was battling with, that the Flannan lighthouse was not operational. This was the first record that something was abnormal on the Flannel Islands. When the Arctur docked at the Leith on the 18th of December 1900, this unusual sighting was passed on to the Northern Lighthouse Board. The board dispatched the lighthouse relief tender ship, the Hesperus, to investigate. That's a mouthful, isn't it? On reaching the lighthouse compound and entering the living quarters, the crew of the Hesperus noticed that the clock on the kitchen wall had stopped. The table was all set ready for a meal that had never been eaten, and one of the chairs around the table had been toppled over. The canary in the cage was the only sign of life that they could find. Returning to the Flannan's eastern landing, the men reported their findings to the captain of the Hesperus, Captain Harvey, who then sent another 2 sailors to the shore once docked, to start looking for signs of life on the Flannan Islands. But no sign of the 3 keepers could be found. Greetings, unexplained people. Thank you for tuning in and listening to Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm an old rocker, an eclectic wicker, and a podcaster who, just like everyone else, is unique. Tonight, I'm going to tell you the mysterious story about the disappearance of the Flannan Island lighthouse keepers. I will now give you the necessary disclaimer. This is a case that involves missing people. All opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts still remain. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, does need some elocution training at times. And as a huge apology goes out to my Scottish listeners, who will probably cringe at my attempt at a Scottish accent. Now, to be perfectly honest, during my research on this case, I've found a lot of conflicting information, so I've tended to go with the most popular reports on the case. I mean, it's not like the internet to give out false information, right? Right. So, back to the story. According to Wikipedia, the Flannan Isle Lighthouse is situated near the highest point on Eilean Moor, one of the Flannan Isles in the Outer Hebrides of the west coast of Scotland. The 23-metre or 75-foot lighthouse was designed by David Allen Stevenson for the Northern Lighthouse Board, NLB. Constructed between 1895 and 1899, the building was undertaken by George Lawson of Rutherglen at a cost of £1,899, inclusive of the building, landing places, stairs and railway tracks. All of the materials used in the build had to be hauled up a 45-metre, 148-foot cliff directly below the site from the supply boats that brought them to the island. A further £3,526 was spent on the shore station at Breechlet on the Isle of Lewis. The lighthouse was first lit on the 7th of December 1899. They are named after St Flannan, who is said to have been the son of Turlo, King of Thomond, and also Molua's nephew and first disciple. They are also known as the Seven Hunters. Now let's look at the 3 keepers. The 3 keepers were James Ducat, who was the principal keeper, aged 43, who came from Arbroath and had spent 2 decades in the lighthouse service. He was a married man and had 4 children. Ducat had been selected to run the lighthouse while it was still under construction and had spent a total of 14 months on Aileen Moor. Secondly is Thomas Marshall. He was the second assistant keeper, aged 28 and unmarried. And last was Donald McArthur, the occasional keeper, aged 40, a part-time keeper who was used when needed. He was an old soldier and was standing in for William Ross, the first assistant keeper, who was on extended sick leave. Donald was married with 2 children. When the crew of the lighthouse relief ship arrived, the crew, along with the keeper, found that the flagstaff had no flag. None of the usual provision boxes had been left on the landing stage for restocking, and more ominously, none of the lighthouse keepers were there to welcome them ashore. Jim Harvey, the captain of Hesperus, attempted to reach them by blowing the ship's whistle and firing a flare, but they were unsuccessful. A boat was launched and put ashore by the relief keeper Joseph Moore. He found the entrance gate to the compound and the main door both closed, the beds unmade and the clock unwound. Returning to the landing stage with this puzzling news, he then went back to the lighthouse with the Hesperus' second mate and seaman. A further search revealed that the lamps had been cleaned and refilled, ready for use. They also found a set of oilskins, suggesting that one of the keepers had left the lighthouse without them. There was no sign of any keepers, neither inside the lighthouse or anywhere on the island. They had completely vanished. The 4 volunteer seamen were left on the island to attend the light, and the Hesperus returned to Lewis. Captain Harvey sent a telegram to the Northern Lighthouse Board dated 26th of December 1900, stating, "A dreadful accident has happened at the Flannans. The 3 keepers, Ducat, Marshall and the occasional, have disappeared from the island. The clocks were stopped and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows, they must have been blown over the cliffs and drowned trying to secure a crane." The men scoured every corner of the island for clues as to the fate of the keepers. My apologies. They found that everything was intact at the east landing, but the west landing did provide considerable evidence of damage caused by the recent storms. Amongst the damage they found a box of 33 metres, 108 feet above sea level, that had been broken and its contents strewn about. Iron railings were bent over. The iron railway by the path was wrenched out of its concrete, and a rock weighing more than a ton had been displaced. And at the top of the cliff, more than 60 metres, 200 feet above sea level, turf had been ripped away as far as 10 metres, that's 33 feet, from the edge of the cliff. On the 29th of December 1900, Robert Muirhead, a Northern Lighthouse Board NLB superintendent, arrived to conduct the official investigation into the accident. Muirhead had originally recruited all 3 of the missing men and knew them all personally. He examined the clothing left behind in the lighthouse and concluded that Ducat and Marshall had gone down to the western landing stage, and that McArthur, the occasional, had left the lighthouse during heavy rain in his shirt sleeves. He noted that leaving the lighthouse unattended was in breach of NLB rules. He also noted that some of the damage to the west landing was difficult to believe unless actually seen, and I quote, "From evidence which I was able to procure, I was satisfied that the men had been on duty till dinner time on Saturday the 15th of December. that they were gone down to the secure box in which the mooring ropes, landing ropes, etc. were kept, and which are secured in the crevice of the rock about 110 feet, 34 metres above sea level, and that an extra large sea had rushed up to the face of the rock, had gone above them, and on coming down with immense force, had swept them completely away. Whether this explanation brought any comfort to the families of the lost keepers is unknown. Ducat left a wife and 4 children, and McArthur a wife and 2 children. But this development tarnished the lighthouse's reputation for many years after the incident. As far as the public were concerned, Muirhead's report wasn't the end of the story, and speculations were soon rife. Theories more suited to the Middle Ages were soon doing the rounds, such as the men being gobbled up by sea giant serpents or whisked away by huge seabirds. One theory had the men leave the island by boat to escape debt, while another had them spirited away by the skeletal crew of a ghost ship. Some people even thought that the men had been kidnapped by foreign spies, or that they had arranged for a ship to take them away so they could start new lives. After more than 10 years, the events were still commented and elaborated on. The 1912 ballad, Flannan Isle, by Wilford Wilson Gibson, refers erroneously to the overturned chair and the uneaten meal laid out on the table, indicating that the keepers had been suddenly disturbed. But according to the relief keeper, in his first-hand account, he stated, "The kitchen utensils were all very clean, which is a sign that it must have been some time after dinner that they left." I'll post a link to the ballad on Mark's Unexplained World and on the Hinckley Community Radio Facebook pages for your listening pleasure. More doubt was cast on the official investigation when the emergence of a logbook supposedly contained several baffling entries between the 12th and 15th of December. In the first entry, Marshall is supposed to have written that a great storm, the likes of which he had never seen before, hit the island. He continued that Ducat was unusually quiet when the storm hit, and McArthur, a big burly man, not known to have much of a sensitive side, was weeping. A second entry has all 3 men praying in the eye of the monstrous storm, and a third and final entry, supposedly written on the 15th of December, states that the storm had passed and all was now calm. On hearing about the existence of these logbook entries, many questioned the idea that the men had been swept out to sea. If anyone had died, surely whoever wrote the 15th of December entry would have mentioned this. There had to be another explanation. But there was indeed another explanation. For some reason, the logbook entries were injected into the story several years after Marshall, Ducat and McArthur disappeared. According to a 14 Times journalist, Mike Dash, after carrying out his own investigation, there is no evidence that these diary entries ever existed. After a short break, we'll look at some of the theories and popular cultures regarding the missing men.
This show is brought to you by courtesy of Neil Packer and the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre. Find them online at www.hauntedresearchcentre.com or at 9 to 11 Regent Street, Hinckley, LE10 1AW. Open Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for guided tours of the haunted rooms at just £3 per person. Booking is essential at all times and over 16s only, unless accompanied by an adult. The haunted rooms are extremely haunted, and paranormal activity could, and has, taken place at any time. Some areas